Hey everybody, it's Gil here with the sailing vessel Dream Chaser, and this week we tore a U.S. Coast Guard cutter. What a cool experience. So as an avid boater, this was really meaningful to me. For those of you that don't know, the U.S. Coast Guard runs rescue missions for mariners at sea. They also provide defense for our nation's shores during war times. What's really interesting is, if you are an avid boater, if you intend to leave the sight of land, the fact that the U.S. Coast Guard is there and present and rescues people is a comfort. It's a safety net. It's a comfort blanket. It absolutely does not replace good seamanship and good decision making and being an accurate and thoughtful captain and skipper. But man, when you're out there and the seas and the weather are somewhat uncontrollable, it's nice to know that they're there. Again, you need life rafts, you need all the things that you should have, but to know that nowadays, if you were to sink in a vessel or have to get into a life raft, in most cases, within 24 hours, you can be rescued. Now, again, that requires you have an e-burb and some kind of a positioning locator beacon such as that. But man, that feels pretty good. You think about mariners from decades ago, right? Lifetimes ago, when they crossed an ocean with no way to communicate at all. Right? They either made it or they didn't. And wives and family members would wait. And if they didn't show up for 3 weeks, well, then maybe they started to worry or sent out a rescue mission. So again, really, really cool experience for us. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video while we tore this U.S. Coast Guard cutter. If you didn't see last week's video, we were in Key West. We took the girls down there for a long weekend. We did a bunch of fun stuff, fed sharks, the whole bit. If you didn't see that video, I'll put a link to it right up here in this upper corner of the screen. We're aboard the U.S. Coast Guard Ingham, which is pretty cool. It's a little Coast Guard museum ship here in Key West. This thing was built in 1936. It actually saw, it was involved in World War II. I don't know much action in this, so we saw escorting ships in World War II. As well as Vietnam, and then post-Vietnam, we also did some patrolling of the water between Cuba and America, and when Fidel Castro opened the port of Mariel, I think it was, one of her biggest rescue missions was saving Cuban refugees that its boats had become swamped in the storm waters between Florida and Cuba, so pretty interesting. So it's pretty cool. She served for 52 years, and in World War II, she performed 31 convoys across the Atlantic, sinking German Nazi U-boat 626. In 1944, she was reassigned to the Pacific and served as the commanding ship for the 7th Fleet. She also served as a flagship for the amphibious landing at Leyte Gulf and later a flagship in the South China Naval Forces in China, Formosa, and Vietnam, which is pretty cool given we have the Formosa boat. It's neat to see that history. Formosa essentially being the island of Taiwan at that time. Here's some of the officers' quarters. Here's one. It's kind of in this center of the ship called the wardrobe area. And then there's another one over here. You can see the bunk over here on that side. These darn near look like prison cells, but this one actually had a port, so probably a high-ranking official here. This is pretty neat. This is inside of an actual pea coat for the officers, and oftentimes when they went to certain ports of call, they would have fancy embroidery done, and since it was not part of the official uniform, they would only do it on the inside of the coat. Pretty cool. We're going to head back into the engine room, and what's cool about this is when this ship first started, this was powered by steam. There's the officer's galley, spick and span back there. We make our way around the corner here. We have the chapel on board. Right down to stained glass windows, if you can see that. As we come out of the chapel, we had the supply officers' room here, and on this side, the warrant officers' bunk and berth. We have some actual berths now for general staff. But still, compared to Navy ships, submarines, this isn't too shabby. Though we're on the officers area, I'll have to see what the regular enlisted area looks like. CPO quarters right in here. This is pretty wild for sure. Steam burners down there. And you can just imagine this without any of this netting up here. This is probably a hot and loud and brutal area. And then we can see an overhead view of the steam room right here. They get quite a good view of it, but man, small area for sure. Obviously they have netting out here to keep people from getting hurt, but pretty wild. These little catwalks. When at sea, rolling around, all the heat that would be generated up here, that'd be pretty wild. Putting catwalks right across these giant steam boilers, if you can see them in there. As we continue our way around, we get to the engineering officers area, and ultimately make our way toward the actual crew mess. Here's that engineering officers area. Everything to do with the ship right here. Ultimately, we get to the crew mess. And this is where the crew would have had their meals. Yeah, and this is a much smaller ship than some of the Navy vessels I've toured. And it sort of shows in this capacity of just the size of the mess. About 100 sailors typically on this ship. 3 meals a day, as you can imagine. Here's the scullery, essentially the dish room. This is actually the old berthing area for the enlisted. It's now a museum. So I'm sure most of the bunks will be out. She started her career in Greenland doing surveys for airfields. So while in the beginning she could carry a seaplane for those surveys, she was then reconfigured, and that back deck was set up with depth charges and guns mounted on the front as we started to get closer to World War II. In 1943, one evening, she ended up sinking the Ram U-boat 606 with depth charges, but was also damaged in that particular battle, along with a Canadian ship. And here you see the Ingham being escorted in by a Polish destroyer. From 1946 to 1968, she was reconfigured back as a Coast Guard peacetime vessel and continued the peacetime operations there. In 1968, she's again reconfigured with some new tripod masts and to begin her assistance in the Vietnam War, 68 and 69. Life at sea wasn't easy. Here is a 327-foot cutter actually replenishing the Ingham at sea. You notice that small parcel on the right-hand side? It's actually going across a cable hooked between the two boats and kept taut. If you've ever flown into Paris, you've been in the Charles de Gaulle airport, and here in this picture you see Charles de Gaulle. He was the president of France inspecting the cutter's honor guard. In 1969 through 1988, it assisted in the drug war off the coast of America. Here you see a expected drug smuggler being captured and frisked. And in 1980, when Fidel Castro opened the port of Mariel, many Cuban refugees fled to Cuba, and the Ingham plied the waters between Florida and Cuba, saving swamp vessels, boats, and Cubans. On April 27th of 1980, a storm hit the straits between Florida and Cuba, and there were over 22 Mayday calls within about 5 minutes. At one point in time, the Ingham had 5 vessels in tow, and you can see here one of the largest of these Cuban refugee boats with over 100 refugees on it. Most were much smaller than that. One of them in tow had 2 fishermen on it. But you can see the acts of desperation to flee a communist country to freedom only 90 miles away. Here's more crew berths aboard the ship. We are more forward than we've been. We're very close to the bow at this point. As a matter of fact, the next section in front of us is where they load the ammunition for the 5-inch gun on the bow. Space is limited on the ship. That's all every sailor got, were those 3 shelves in a locker, and all their stuff had to fit right in that. We continue into the lockers for the enlisted. Here's the handling room for the 5-inch gun on the bow, and you can see just how big those are. It's tough to see in relation to what size they are. They're probably 20 to 24 inches long over there on that shelf. Here we have the ship's office, ship store, and barbershop. Barbershop's not big and fancy, but then again, a buzz cut didn't take a whole lot of space and tools, did it? Your average barber has that red and white pole. Well, here we just paint the door red and white. It's open, I guess they're open. Suggest one heeds there. Captain certainly had a nice quarter, huh? It wasn't uncommon the captain would be with dignitaries or entertaining people on board. Captain's pantry was right here off of that room where all the meals would have been prepared specifically for the captain and any dignitaries. This is the Combat Information Center on the bridge.
Just made broadcast to Manila to arrange meeting for surrender.
Not like the ship panels of today, huh? But you notice they're all modular for easy replacement. You can see here up on the bridge, this is the navigator center here. Radar and all kinds of chart plotters and whatnot. The tools of the navigator weren't significantly different back then. Paper charts, parallel rule, pair of points, and you can see all of the sextants. Now clearly there was electronic, if you will, instrumentation, but the navigator of the day had to know how to do celestial navigation. And you can see the seats up to the actual bridge. And nowadays the bridge sits and looks right over here at the Port of Key West, where we have a couple of cruise ships just chilling out. So you can see the 5-inch gun down there, the white one with the black barrel and the red ends, and then these smaller guns up here on this upper lift. The bridge is beautiful. We can't get inside there, but I don't know if you can see that beautiful polished binnacle over the compass. We saw the crew mess before, and here is the galley for the larger crew, including large pots for boiling over there and a series of ovens over there. When I talked about the 5-inch gun, that whole thing right there is the turret. Gives you an idea on the sheer size of this thing. And you can see the barrel there. That is quite a projectile coming out of that thing for sure. When the ammo was fed up from down below where I showed earlier, this is where it would come up in here, and the gunners would actually place the shells right up in this track as they launched these things out of here. I'm very happy with the windlass we have on our boat, but that puts it to shame, eh? Hey everybody, I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. I thought it was so cool to be able to go on this US Coast Guard cutter. What a cool history, right? From doing surveys for airfields before World War II, joining World War II, sinking a U-boat, peacekeeping missions, going back to regular Coast Guard duties, being in the Vietnam War, the war on drugs, rescuing Cuban refugees between Cuba and the United States. What a cool history, and I'm honored that I got to go aboard this boat. I hope you guys really did find it interesting. If you did, and we've earned it, by all means, we'd love to have you subscribe to our channel. If you thought this video was worth watching, go ahead and click the like button, the thumbs up. That just tells YouTube that this video is worth recommending to other people with similar interests as you. Again, I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and we'll see you next Friday at the same time. Everybody, have a wonderful day, safe sailing, and following seas.